Hey YouTube, it's Latrina Patrick. I have really been having some technical issues tonight, so I am trying to really give it a shot for those people who really are interested in what I have to say. I will never do this like this again. I won't. I think my best bet is not to try to schedule it. So I decided to try again, another attempt at going live, just to have a conversation with you guys. I know there are people who wanted to do this, and so hopefully you'll be able to get notification that I'm back live again. And if not, you'll at least be able to have a video to go back to that's not cut up or chopped up or, that ran out of time or something. So my apologies for all the technical difficulties, and I'm just going to go at it again. But I really wanted to just answer a few questions tonight, and especially around questions that I get from people who want to know more about grant writing or nonprofit leaders, people who are interested in becoming a nonprofit leader. I get all kinds of questions from people. My own experience being a grant writer and also having been someone who has worked as a nonprofit leader, as a director of programs, a program manager, and some other capacities for several private nonprofits and some large and some small. So I really wanted to, just share my knowledge with people. And I try to do that as often as I can. That's what I do through my consulting business, Greater Vision Consulting. www.greatervisionconsulting is where you can find out more information about my background, as far as my grant reviews, as far as the trainings that I've been doing for years, which is my favorite part. I consider myself a teacher at heart, and that's why I enjoy doing curricular development and also live online trainings as well as in-person training. So I want to jump into some questions that I tried to get into before I started having all the technical problems. And I'm going to pull up my little notes here on my iPad. But so one of the questions that I started answering before is about grant capacity building, and I should say capital improvement grants. And I started out talking about how I do get a lot of questions from nonprofits who are interested in building transitional homes or doing things for the homeless or kids in foster care or people in substance abuse treatment, recovery, and residential programs. And that's a very common area for people. And sometimes people are interested in trying to find funding to actually build transitional homes or shelter homes or whatever it is for kids or women or children or adults or whatever. And the question is, where can I find money to build homes for foster kids or build homes for people coming out of jail? Those are things that are not, those are not going to be projects that are going to be easily funded. So you do have primarily the department that's going to give money for things like that is going to be HUD, Housing and Urban Development. And they are typically are the ones that give money for building projects and things like that. But what I say to people just coming out the gate, it's going to be a minute before you're eligible for that type of funding. HUD grants are some of the most complicated grants to get, but they also require a lot of fiscal capacity and a lot of capital for the nonprofit organization that's applying to get that funding. So HUD will be doing a lot of the matching funding, but when they're coming out of pocket for millions of dollars to help build homes or to house people, you have to have a lot to bring to the table. For someone coming out the gate and looking for funding to do something like that, that is not going to be a project that somebody from a government, a traditional grantor, is going to just give you seed money to build something like that. That's just not how it works. In this case, you really have to look at it from the standpoint of being a traditional business. And you go into when you go to the bank for a loan or something like that to build projects, you got to have something to bring to the table. You got to have some skin in the game. And the feds require you to have some skin in the game. So if they're going to give you, millions of dollars to do a major project like that, you have to have some dollars to bring to the table as well, because they're not going to give it to an organization that doesn't have the capacity to handle it. So coming out the gate, it's just the wrong question to ask is, how can I find funding to build a transitional home or to build, a homeless shelter. That's just not how it works. So, what I recommend is to start where you are. Start small, start trying to raise some funding on your own. Start trying to, I mean, because anytime you start in a nonprofit, you still got to bring some money to the table, whatever you're doing, because you need to have multiple streams of revenue to be successful as a nonprofit, because you can't just have all your funding, all your programs and your organization dependent on grant money, because that money won't always be there and it's not always guaranteed. So you got to have some other means of getting the funding that you need. So, and that kind of leads into one of the other things I get, when it comes to people wanting to know, people when they get when people first get their 501c3, sometimes people will reach out and say, okay, I have a 501c3, I'm ready to get some grants. And that's really, at that point, depending on the person's background. Now, I'm talking about someone who is just starting out, they haven't been doing anything, they've had a dream, they want to do this, and now they're getting started and they're getting their foundation in place. So for people like that, once you get your 501c3, that's a good place to start and that's an exciting place to be. But at that point, you're not necessarily grant ready. And what that means is you still have to build your capacity to be able to apply for funding. So at that level, there are things that you can go for that you may have a chance of getting. And those are usually smaller grants, from private foundations or even some corporate grants. Those are a lot simpler as far as the application process. A lot of those are intended to be for seed money so that you can get your program started. They just want to invest in you a little bit. They're going to give you a few $1,000s, and that will help. So start small. So if you are new and you don't have any funding yet and you just got your 501c3, start looking for some of the smaller grants, start looking for local money, and start looking for local donors. So the first place is to look in your own backyard, because private donors, especially for foundations, they really want to fund community projects and in the community they define as that community which they reside, where they have their nonprofit or where they have their employees. And so that's where most private foundations want to start their giving. And you can build a relationship much easier on the local level by trying to pursue funding from your local funders. So start small and then build your way up. And and if you're brand new, do things that help you to be more likely to get some of that private small foundation funding, like doing your own little private fundraiser things. When you're really small, it's a lot easier to get out there and start trying to make connections with people. Trying to network and learn, telling people about who you are. You never know where your funding can come from. So when you're brand new, it's really important to get out there, start raising the awareness about who you are, what you're doing, talking to people. And you'll be surprised at how many people want to invest in what you're doing if you have a good project, if you have a sound program, and if you have a lot of passion for what you're doing. You'd be really surprised. So when you're just starting out, don't necessarily try to go for grants, especially big grants, but just try to start where you are. And, don't try to get too much funding, because you want to build your capacity so that you can handle the funding, and your application looks a lot more fundable. Okay. So when you're first starting out, I really just encourage you to start slow and work your way up. Another question, or I should say another scenario that I put down to kind of talk about is in relationship to faith-based organizations. Okay, so sometimes I get questions about, faith-based organizations who want to do certain things in the community, because, a lot of faith-based organizations do a lot of great community work. And the majority of them that are really committed to doing community work, and I don't mean just like evangelism, because there's a difference. I don't mean like people who go out to knock on doors and things like that to try to get people, to come to the church or whatever. I mean real community work where you are taking an active role in changing the environment in your community, whether it's around homelessness or child abuse or domestic violence or, teen pregnancy, whatever it is. When you have a viable program like that, that's a little easier because most churches realize today that they have to set up a separate entity that's separate from the church. Everybody knows, or I should say, most people realize that churches are tax exempt just by the nature of being a church, but it's a lot different when they start doing programs. It's still a good idea to make sure that the church sets up a separate 501c3 to do their community work. Because if you are still a church and you say, well, we are church, so we want to apply for this grant to do our, our program where we feed the homeless. Well, if you start going after major funding based on the church, and let's say you start going after government funding, it's starting to get real tricky because the government will fund to faith-based organizations, but they have to make sure that there's no commingling of funds. So if you haven't separated your nonprofit work aside from your church business, then you're never going to really be able to get any funding to do what it is you're trying to do. So the recommendation is to always set up a separate 501c3 organization that the church can do their community-driven work around. And that's very common nowadays. So I bring all that up to say that, if you are a faith-based organization and you're just trying to get funding through that entity alone and saying that that is what qualifies you, then you're going to have much of a harder time trying to really attract funding, especially major funders for some of these projects that you're working on. So I really encourage you to make sure that when you are a faith-based organization, that you are separate. You've separated your church from that organization so that you can assure your funders that they're not funding church business as opposed to community-related projects. Okay, so I just really want to make that distinction. You're not going to automatically be eligible for a grant just because you're a church. And sometimes I get questions posed like that. So I think that those are the major questions that I had on here. And if you have and if you've joined me, if you want to go ahead and type something in, let me know who you are and where you are. I would love to know that. And so I guess I'll do unless I get some specific questions. I tend to like to give tips on some of the most common things when it comes to grant applications. And so, I see a lot of applications when it comes to, I review a lot of grants. I review grants for the feds. I've reviewed grants for SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse Mental Health Service Administration. I reviewed grants for the Department of Education in Georgia. I reviewed grants for the Administration of Children and Families. And I've done a lot of grant reviews for like local and county governments in, different capacities. So I see a lot of stuff. And, one of the things that I can tell you when you're getting into the field of grant writing, and I say this all the time, anybody that's been, following me or getting my emails or watching my videos, I always say the number one reason most grants don't get funded is because people don't follow instructions. And that's just true. And so, if you can really get into the habit of taking a grant at face value. So if you are, and what I mean by that is, even if you're going after a small foundation grant, they still have a grant instructions, and we typically refer to that as a request for proposals, RFP, or RFA, which is request for applications. But there is some type of document with instructions, and that's basically what an RFP is. And so the more money there is, the larger that RFP, that announcement is going to be, and the more instructions it's going to have for you. But if you can take it at face value, unless it's something that's written really confusing and you're not sure, In that case, you want to call the program contact on that RFP to get some clarification. But for the most part, just take it for what it is. Whatever they're asking, just take it literally and answer it. Don't read into it, because honestly, they're not really going to be that complicated unless, it's a major type of grant. But the instructions are pretty simple. We tend to complicate them. And so when we start reading into the questions, or maybe they mean that, or I'm going to tell them this, or I think that, don't, that's when you get way off track and you end up getting away from what they're trying to obtain from you, and then you present a bad response. And if you present a bad response, you're going to get a bad score, and that's what determines whether or not you get funding, is a score that you get. So make sure that you're able to just take it at face value and answer the questions as they are, and answer every question, because really that's just, half, not the battle, but it is kind of half the battle. When you have applications and they're being reviewed, the viewers want to know, um the funder knows what they're trying to get. They know what information they need in order to be able to make a decision about whether or not they want to fund you. So that's how the questions are set up. So take yourself out of the equation about, well, what you think they want to know. They want to know exactly what they ask, and they have a reason for asking. So take it at face value and answer it directly and completely. If you do that, that's half your score. The remainder of the score is really the substance of what it is that you put into your answer. So I really want to, I probably can do another live Q&A or something just around just writing strategies. So I won't get too much into that, because there's a lot to tackle when it comes to trying to give people instructions for how to write. But just in general, answer the questions as they are. Don't read into them, and give them what they want. And if it's really confusing and not clear, then that's when you need to make sure that you call in, that you call the contact that's on that is on the application. And I'm trying to see if, I can't really see anything as far as who's on. I can see that people have joined, and I'm trying to see who the participants are, but it's not showing me. So if you can type in something, that will be great I'm going to just type something in, see if you can see that. And hopefully, I don't want to mess anything up. I promise you, I'm not going back out like I did before. So if you can type in who you are and where you're from, and hopefully if you have a question, that would be great. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep chatting and just trying to just answer some stuff that you may want to know. Let's see. I've talked a little bit about funds for capital improvement, around the questions that I get for people who are looking to find funding to build transitional homes, or to help people in recovery, or people getting out of jail. We talked a little bit about that. I talked a little bit about, what it means for, what it means for a 501c3 to be eligible for grants, and specifically churches. And so I was just sent a message that someone can't type into the chat. So it must be a setting on here that I have messed up or something, guys. That's a little frustrating, and it's all operator error. It's all me. This is only my second time going live on YouTube. And so maybe I'll try something else. Since I don't want to risk messing up the live shot or live feed. So maybe if you're at your computer, if you have a burning question, if you want to send me an email, my phone is right by me. I can get emails. So you can send me an email maybe, and I can answer the questions live that way. My email is greatervisionconsulting@gmail.com. Greater Vision Consulting at gmail.com, GreaterVision consulting at gmail.com. And we can just, I can just go from there because like I said, I'm going to really study up on this live chat thing. I didn't have as much problems last week, but I seem to be causing a lot of problems for myself this week. So we'll try that. So I talked about the faith-based and and the 501c3, and how they need to have a separate organization set up to be able to do that successfully. I talked a little bit about building your capacity before pursuing grants. Let me give you some more tips around that, because that's where a lot of people are. And this discussion was around, just because you have a 501c3 doesn't mean that you can automatically start getting grants. I mean, you're eligible to apply, but you're not going to be the most fundable. And so let me talk to you a little bit about what it means to be fundable, because what it means to be fundable, assuming that you're applying for funding at your level, meaning you're not trying to apply for something that you're not qualified for, eligible to get. So let's assume that you're brand new. You're not trying to apply for Fed grants because you can't get those right now. So you are brand new and you are applying for a simple foundation grant. Let's say you're applying for a grant from Allstate, like Allstate, those guys have little foundations or whatever. And say you're trying to apply for a $10,000 grant for your program. Well, what makes you a little more fundable, even in this case, because they're going to give funding to people who are a little smaller, just starting out. They assume that those are their applicants. So it's not going to be as hard. But these are things that make you fundable. So what makes you fundable is, number one, you have a really great premise or really great program that is in alignment with the vision and the mission of that foundation. So, number one, you are applying for funding from an organization or foundation that clearly supports the type of work that you do, because it's outlined on their website. They made it clear in their funding application that, we are interested in programs that help women who are suffering from domestic violence. Okay. And you do that. So number one out the gate, that makes you a little more fundable than the person who's really trying to stretch and make their program fit. All right. So that helps. Number two, what makes you fundable is that you have really good community support. So funders nowadays, you are never going to find anybody, whether it's the feds or private organizations, that are just really interested in funding what we call silo programs, right? So I have a substance abuse prevention background, and this is a term we use a lot because the feds really are not interested in just funding one organization that's trying to do everything. In today's time, when grants are severely competitive, and they always are, but they are way more competitive now. They have so many people applying for very little money that they want to get the most bang for their buck. So that's one reason that they want to see community partners, because they want to make sure that you have more people that have bought into what it is that you're doing. So if you haven't invested in your organization, your community that's around you is not interested in investing in your organization, and not just financially, but just through resources, their time, partnerships like that, then why should they? So they really look to see how many community partners that you have, and what those partners are doing. It's one thing to say, well, people support us, but what are they actively doing as a part of what your organization, the work that you're doing? So they may not be giving you physical money or writing you a check, but they may be allowing you to use their facility. They may be allowing you to access their staff, or their staff to contribute to what you're doing, or they may volunteer to help you, or they may provide you with resources. Whatever it is, don't get discouraged if you're not getting checks from your community partners, but it's really more about their commitment to the work you're doing and their active involvement in that. So that makes you fundable. So we've just established that You having a good program that aligns with the funder, you have community partners, and honestly, that you have a really, not just that you have a mission that aligns with the organization, but you have a program approach, a strategy that you're using that is proven to work. And what I mean by that is the term you'll hear a lot is evidence-based approach, which means that you have chosen a specific strategy that you're employing with your target population, that there is documented evidence that shows that if you do A, B, C, and D, that we did in this program, that you will get these results, and that it didn't work just one time, that it's been proven to work time and time and time again. So, for example, I'll go back to my substance abuse prevention background. In substance abuse prevention, everything we do has to be evidence based. And so we were working in particular to keep kids off of drugs, alcohol, tobacco, meth, prescription drugs. I covered the gamut. And the funders want to know, what are what's your approach to helping kids stay off of drugs? Well, there are tons of evidence based programs that we actually got heard about or learned about through SAMHSA and some of those other organizations. There are websites specifically designed, that outline tons of programs depending on the age group, the background, whatever. So we can cite these specific programs and we can report about the results these types of programs and as outcomes these programs have had. So unless it's really something that people are really trying to invest in, that's like a pilot program or some type of research and innovation, then people want to invest in something that has been proven to work, not something that is you're out there kind of winging it. Again, remember, they're trying to get the most bang for their buck. And so they want to make sure that if I'm giving money to you, it's going to yield results. Okay. So make sure that you have a proven approach. And even if you don't have a lot of money, they still want to see that you have a plan, that you have some type of finances and or some type of plan to not only get finances but to sustain your program. So you may be brand new, you may not have very much, and honestly some of the smaller foundations that are going to be some of the foundations that will fund smaller nonprofits, they're not expecting a lot, because part of their mission is to help, some of the small nonprofits. If that's a part of their mission, they're not going to really gig you on the fact that you don't have, $50,000 in the bank. They probably won't even ask you about it, but they do want to know that you've given some thought to how you're going to be a good steward of the money that they're going to give you and how you're going to sustain your program when their money runs out. Okay. So nobody really wants to just give you money that they know that when your money runs out, the program's not going to be there. So they're looking at those things. So we've said that they're looking to see if what you do aligns with their mission. They're looking to see if you have community support. They're looking to see if you have evidence-based programming or at least some type of strategy that has been proven to work and that you've given some serious consideration to what you're going to be doing to yield the type of results and outcomes that you're trying to get. And then they want to make sure that you do have some type of fiscal capacity. So looking at all those things, that helps them make a determination that you are a little more grant ready. And so what happens is that when you get that particular grant, say you get that little $10,000 grant to get your program going, then after that, now you have something that you can build from. And now you have something that after that period of time is running out, that you have some proven outcomes that now you can report those outcomes when you start applying for your next grant. You can say, well, we've been around for a year or whatever. We've served 20 kids, and out of those kids we served, 75% of them were able to improve their test scores and they were advanced to the next grade. Whatever it is that you were doing, you have something that you can report. That, again, is building your capacity to help you get to the next level. Okay. So I'm just looking to see if anybody sent me anything. So that is that. And What else? I am really sorry that you guys can't type in these questions because um I want to be able to address whatever you might have. Again, if you want to send in a question, it's greatervisionconsulting@gmail.com. Greatervisionconsulting@gmail.com. Okay. And then, so we talked about having the 501c3. Um, yeah. And so, but yeah, so that's just some of the basic things that I just kind of want to touch on, some of the most common things that I get in asking about grants, nonprofits. Let's see, we've talked a little bit about grant writing. I've talked a little bit about um, capacity building for um, nonprofit organizations. And then another thing is, I guess I'm trying to think about some of the common stuff I get when I see these applications is I guess I didn't say anything about staff or the people that you have implementing the program. That's really key as well. So, if I had to say a fifth thing, that would be a really key fifth thing. So, even if you don't have a large staff, okay, budget. So, even if you don't have a large staff, then you still want to make sure you have the credentials. So, if you're the executive director and you're kind of like a one-man band at the time, highlight your background. If there was a reason why you're running this program and why you got into this. So highlight your background, your relevant background, your experience doing what you do, your experience working with that particular population, because that's giving you credibility. And that is definitely giving the funder a little more security about and confidence in your ability to pull off what it is you're trying to pull off. Okay. I have a question. Can you cover what is an appropriate budget in submitting a grant package? So it depends on the grant package and it depends on the parameters of the application. So let's say this is if it's a larger organization and you are applying for funding in that RFP, it's going to show you, my computer is doing stuff. In that RFP, it's going to show you or tell you the budget parameters. So it's going to tell you that we're going to fund 20 applications for up to $1 million each or whatever. So it's going to tell you what is the maximum amount you can apply for. And when a grant says a maximum amount, they mean that to the letter. So that is a part of the thing. And the other thing about the budget, when you're looking at what you're submitting, you're only focus first and foremost on what it really costs to fund your program. So when you are putting together your budget, make sure that when you're putting, and I always say the budget is driven by the narrative. So the narrative is when you're describing what your program is about. So look at everything. One of the biggest mistakes that people make when they're submitting their budget is they forget the little things and that stuff ends up costing them. So for example, we were reviewing a grant recently and they had applied for a major grant, but they forgot to send out about postage. And postage, which it sounds like it's not a big deal, but postage is a big deal when you're talking about you having to do these surveys and you need to send out the surveys. Well, they factored in that, but they forgot to factor in the fact that they got to have the people return those surveys back to them in the mail. And when you're sending out a lot, that's a lot of money. And so they overlook that. Once that grant has been awarded and funded, it's very difficult to get them to change that budget or make amendments unless it's something really key. So look at everything it's going to cost you. What's it going to cost in gas, to take the kids back and forth to the program? What's it going to cost? Account for raises. When you're a grant and you're a multi-year grant, and this is on the larger grants, you want to account for the fact that you want to be able to give your key staff pay increases like 3% or whatever, especially because grants are what we call soft money and they're not going to be around forever. So if you're hiring new staff and this is not a guaranteed position beyond that grant period, you want to make allowances for that. So to attract the people to the program, you want to make sure you pay them well, but you want to put in there account for those increases in their salary that's in accordance with the norm or the area that you live in or the feds or the state or whatever type of program it is. So account for that. So the biggest thing I'll tell you about submitting your budget is look at what it really does and realistically costs to run that program, and then make sure that that is covered in that narrative so that they don't get to the budget and see all kinds of expenses that haven't been justified in what you wrote in that narrative. Okay. And so then at that point, when you look at everything is going to realistically cost you to fund that program, then look at what the maximum allowances are for that budget. If they have a maximum that you can apply for, or, if you don't want to go over that, make sure it doesn't exceed that, and then make adjustments where you can to make sure it fits. But that budget is going to be driven by what the funder has set as maximum allowances, and also what your program is going to require. And I have another question about how important are letters of recommendation from others for the grant. That's a really good question. I want to make a distinction between letters of recommendation, which we commonly refer to sometimes as letters of support, more often in the grant world, and also letters of commitment. Those are two different things. So a letter of support is going to be something where you want to show that you have like I said before, you want to have community engagement, you want to have community partners to demonstrate that people support what you do. Well, make sure that, so in that instance, it does look good to get a letter from, say, your mayor who supports what you do, or your local congressman, or, a major partner, like you're working with kids and you're doing an after school program. If the school system is school superintendent writes a letter of support, that's really good. That's a really great demonstration that you have community support that's always smiled upon. The difference between the letter of support that says, ABC organization is wonderful. They've been working with kids for 5 years. We support them. We love them. We let them use our space. Any funds that you can give them, we would really appreciate it. It would be money well spent. Fine. A letter of commitment is different. And sometimes a letter of commitment will be written as a memorandum of understanding or a memorandum of agreement. You'll hear us say MOU for memorandum of understanding, and an MOA for memorandum of agreement. But those are all like letters of commitment. So a letter of commitment is what they are specifically doing in support of that program. And this is where you want to spell out. So if you're doing it in the letter of commitment format, where it's just a letter on a letterhead, then they need to spell out, we are an ABC organization. We've been working with, the Boys and Girls Club for the past 5 years. As a part of this grant, we commit to do A, B, C, and D. We commit to provide $5,000 in matching funding for this after school program. We commit to allowing the Boys and Girls Club to come to our facility to house their program. We commit to providing snacks for the after school. Whatever they commit to, that's what you want to see. And that's a step above a letter of support, because now they have skin in the game. And funders love to see that. Now, when you're doing that in the form of like a memorandum of understanding or memorandum of agreement, that's a little more official, and it's more of like a contract. And so on that form, you spell out the agreement in very formalized fashion. I, such and such, as contractor, whatever, we agree to whatever. Then you have specific bullet points of what each entity is responsible for doing. And then you have the authorizing official for all parties to sign. So if it's your executive director and the executive director of that organization that's your community partner, it's spelled out, it's very formalized. And so that's a commitment. That is a step above a letter of support. And funders really like seeing that. And quite frankly, for the large programs, the big grants, they require it. So that's a really, really great question. And I'll just tell you as a tip, when it comes as a grant writer, you always want to have, whether they ask for it or not, with the exception of feds, they'll never give the feds anything they don't ask for. But for community grants and private foundations, they're a little more lenient and they may allow you to submit other things, but you always want to put those letters of support in there or letters of commitment in there to build the strength of your application. That's the first thing I get when I'm writing a grant. So as a grant writer, you don't have a lot of time. And so knowing how important those things are and knowing that it's something that is beyond, like you really have to kind of rein in and you have to depend on other people to get it and you have such a small window to get them. That's the first thing that I do is I send out I to save time, I always draft up a letter, a template for them, for my partners to sign. The more you can do on your end to facilitate their lives and to get your stuff back to you as fast as you can, do that. So I always have like a template, and I have that in my grant writers toolkit that's on my website. I have templates of letters of support. So that when it's time for me to get them, I can pull from something and cut and paste stuff out of there and make it personalized, send that out to the people who need it. Always give them a fake timeline to get your stuff back because they never get it back on time. So if you know your drop dead date to get that letter of support in hand by December 15th, as far as that community partner is going to know, I need it by December 10th because I promise you, they're never going to get it to you on time. They mean well, but people are busy. So you make it as easy for them as possible. So you write it up. You tell them to fill in the blanks of what they're going to do if you need to do that. Or if you know, just write it for them and then have them look it over and sign it and then get it back ASAP. But I promise you, that's the biggest time saver is to get that stuff done as soon as possible because you're always going to need them. And then the other tip I'll give you when it comes to letters of support is when you have a program and like say, for example, we use the Boys and Girls Club and you've been working with the school district for years with that. They're a long-term partner. They're not going anywhere and barring anything major happening. So for partners like that, I like to keep a grant letter of support or letter of commitment on hand that I can use for up to a year. So you date it and the funder's not going to care that it's written within 6 months to a year if nothing has changed. But so you have one on hand or on file, especially when you apply for a lot of grants. The only thing that you can do to keep you from having to get them to rewrite it is to keep the entry or the opening statement generic instead of saying the specific grant that you're applying for. Just keep it generic in that line and just keep all the other stuff that they're going to do for you. Keep that in there, because that probably won't really change that much. And that way you have it on file. It's got the signatures and you don't have to keep going back to that same partner every couple of weeks or every couple of months when you're applying for a new grant. So that's a really good time saver, but I wouldn't stretch that out for longer than a year. That's the maximum I would do it. I would change those letters up every year. Okay. So that's a really great little way to do that. So, I've been on now for a little over 40 minutes. And so I hate that I haven't been able to get, the live interaction, but I do appreciate the comments and the questions. So with that note, I want to tell you guys that if you haven't already, if you're new to me in the chat, make sure you sign up to my email updates on my website at greatervisionconsulting.com. And that way I'll keep you posted on events that I have coming up, courses that I'm offering. And I want you definitely to make sure you stay in tune for January that's coming up in the new year, making a lot of major changes, putting some new stuff out, major courses. And I'm really excited about that. It's going to be a great benefit to my subscribers. And so make sure that you stay in touch so that you will be notified about those changes that are coming up because it's going to be major. And I'm going to make a major change and announcement coming up towards the end of January that I'm super excited about. So if you haven't already, go over to my website and make sure you are subscribed to get my email updates. And obviously, if you're not already on this channel on YouTube, make sure you are subscribed to G Vision Consulting so that you will be notified when I go live. And I promise I will get this live thing down. I will get better at it as far as the technical standpoint. And you just keep doing it, right? That's how you get better. You just keep doing it. And if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email. You can send an email through the website at greatervisionconsulting.com, or you can send me an email at greatervisionconsulting@gmail.com. www.homebusinesscoach.com. All right. Thank you guys for taking the time to come on tonight. Thank you for being patient with me through all the technical difficulties. And I'll see you again on here very, very soon. Talk to you soon, guys. Good night.